Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us for this exciting live reading and Q&A with HIV LGBT activist Peter Staley. As you may know, much of ME Action's work over the years has been informed and inspired by the AIDS movement, which makes it a true honor for us to have Peter with us today. Before we get started, I'm happy to announce that we have two winners of our book raffle, Krista Coombs and Billy Hanlon. They will both receive copies of Peter Staley's book, Never Silent. So I'll be in touch online or offline afterwards to get your addresses and get that over to you. Congratulations. So to introduce Peter and to moderate the Q&A following his live reading is ME Action's incredible volunteer leader, Terri Wilder. Terri was diagnosed with myalgic encephalomyelitis in March 2016. Since her diagnosis, she has worked with elected officials, public health departments, healthcare providers, and activists to raise awareness about ME in New York State and across the globe. She was finishing her PhD in sociology at Georgia State University when she became ill, however, believes that she's had the disease since the mid-1990s. Terri is currently a volunteer with ME Action and the co-leader of ME Action New York. She has represented us on the Federal Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Advisory Committee and has met with HHS, the NIH, and the CDC to demand changes in how the government responds to ME and Long COVID. Terri is also the creator of our incredible activist camp and is passionate about mobilizing the community to speak truth to power. She uses the skills she learned from the AIDS movement and the LGBTQ community to fight for all of us. She believes in disability justice, collective liberation, and can't wait to engage in civil disobedience in 2022. Thank you so much. And go ahead and take it away, Terri.
Thanks, Julia. I appreciate the nice opening there. Welcome everyone to our event tonight. I am really excited for us to all gather tonight and really happy that I get to do this with my gay husband, who I love so much. For those of you who are not familiar with Peter, I'll just give a quick introduction. Peter Staley is one of the leading AIDS and LGBTQ rights activists of his generation, playing a critical role in some of ACT-UP's best known actions, and then co-founding the Treatment Action Group and PrEP for All. Today, Staley speaks to audiences worldwide on grassroots activism and is the lead plaintiff against multiple pharmaceutical companies for anti-competitive practices in Staley versus Gilead. So the way we're going to roll tonight is that I have asked Peter if he could read from his brand new book, and then we'll open it up for a discussion. And that will not only be questions that I have for Peter, but also for our audience members who we encourage you to put your questions in the chat. So before we get started, Julia, I'm just going to ask if you would mute your line. That way we can control a little bit of the background noise. And Peter, welcome. I love you and I look forward to our conversation, but I'm going to turn it over to you to start your reading from your book.
Thanks, Terri. It's great to be here. You can hear me okay? Is that right, Terri? Before I start reading?
You're good. Thank you.
Good. So I'm going to read from a chapter called AZT, kind of in the middle of the book, middle of my memoir. And this was the beginning of civil disobedience that we launched against Burroughs Wellcome in 1989, after we had done some inside activism with them. We reached out to the head of research. The press had dubbed him Mr. AZT, Dr. David Berry, and asked for a meeting. They granted us a meeting. We went down to Research Triangle Park to their headquarters and had a couple hours meeting with him. We insisted that he lower the price of AZT, the first drug approved for HIV. We pled our case. We didn't expect them to lower the price the next day, just with meeting with them. But as I was there, I was scoping out the building's security in case we needed to come back. And I'm going to pick up in the chapter at the moment we decided to come back and let them know how serious we were about getting the price of AZT down. 3 months later, I pulled into the same parking lot in a budget rental van filled with 7 other activists. After 3 weeks of intricate planning, we had driven 9 hours from New York, and this time we weren't there to talk. To no one's surprise, Borough's Welcome had not lowered the price of AZT in response to our impassioned, ethical and financial arguments. It was time to let the company know we wouldn't let this go. My recruited comrades hadn't seen the building yet, so we parked near the back of the parking lot. I rehashed the action plan, pointing to where things would happen the next morning. But we still had a busy night ahead. We drove to the airport to pick up a second, less conspicuous rental vehicle, a black mid-sized Ford Tempo, exactly what traveling salesmen would use. Then we drove both vehicles to our temporary home base, the Heart of Durham Hotel. At $37 a night, it was the cheapest hotel I could find, and they didn't care if we packed 4 to a room. Jay Blotcher and Steve Rosenbush, known for their relentless work on ACT UP's media committee, started setting up a fax machine and rearranging furniture to create a media center in one of the rooms. As this was going on, 4 of us started packing the briefcases we'd use to bring all our gear into the building. James McGrath, our butch 6'2" part-time carpenter, suggested equipment for our mission: battery-operated drills and enough steel mending plates, corner braces, and self-drilling tech screws to build a one-room extension on a house. I packed up all the tech gear we'd need for media interviews, including a rented first-generation cellular phone that looked like a gray brick, and a dinky portable TV, along with a backup battery in case they cut the power to our location. I also squeezed in a glass cutter and 2 suction cups for grabbing glass panes. Blaine Mosley, a 26-year-old interior designer, packed our walkie-talkies, a huge banner that said, AZT, pay or die, 4 handcuffs, a padlock, and a long chain. Lee Arsenault, a 41-year-old clothing importer who had been diagnosed with AIDS the year before, stuffed his briefcase with Snicker bars, bottled water, a first aid kit, a roll of toilet paper, and some industrial-strength garbage bags that could double as a portable toilet. Shit, whispered Lee, with all 4 briefcases still open. Someone was knocking on our hotel door. My heart skipped a beat before I quickly remembered our local pro bono lawyer had come to brief us. I had found Stuart Fisher through recommendations from local gay rights activists. One tenet in American civil disobedience: if you plan to get arrested for a good cause, find a pro bono lawyer to represent you in the county where it will happen. Just like gay folk, lefty lawyers are everywhere. Stuart gave us all the same briefing he had given me a couple weeks earlier. Based on the action I had described, the 4 activists involved would likely face a charge of misdemeanor trespass and felony charges for breaking and entering and damage to property. The local prosecutor could also get creative with a charge of misdemeanor assault, even though we had no plans to assault anyone. Just one of these charges, felony breaking and entering, carried a possible 10-year jail sentence. It's a lawyer's job to spell out the worst-case scenario, but also provide you with a best guess of what a final plea bargain might look like. The difference between these 2 scenarios is always vast. Finding activists who aren't scared off by the worst-case scenario is often the most challenging pre-action task, but far less so in ACT UP. Our activists did not suffer from a lack of courage. When Stewart asked James, Lee, Blaine, and me if we understood the risks we faced, we all answered quickly, "Yep, we're ready." Rounding out our team of 8, Dan Baker and Deborah Gavito would provide us with on-site support and could face arrest as accomplices. They didn't bat an eye either. I barely slept that night. This action involved getting past security in the main lobby, and I hadn't nailed down exactly how we'd do this. I brought everyone down to North Carolina based on an untested hunch, and it felt like a total crapshoot. Lying in bed, my head kept spinning. Was there a way to test things first before leading the 4 of us into an embarrassing fiasco? At around 2 a.m., it hit me. If Dan Baker was up to it, he'd be pressed into service the next morning. But at the moment, he was fast asleep. With my mind calmed by this new plan, I finally dozed off. The alarm clock buzzed loudly at 7 a.m. With Jay and Steve staying at the hotel to run a hopefully busy media center later that morning, the 6 of us heading to Research Triangle Park needed to look the part. As we had on earlier actions, we donned our best corporate drag. Coats and ties for the guys, a nice blouse and skirt for Deborah. Evidence of our queer city roots were removed, including multiple earrings on Blaine and a single diamond stud for my right earlobe. Deborah actually had to add earrings. I briefed Dan on my new plan, and he was game. After a high-protein breakfast, the 6 of us hit the road in our rented vehicles for the short drive to Research Triangle Park. We parked the van in a lot across the street from the headquarters at 9:45 a.m. and did final checks on our cell phones and walkie-talkies. Dan and the 4 infiltrators piled into the Ford sedan and drove to our target. At 9:55 a.m., Dan confidently walked into the lobby of Burroughs Welcome. He asked the guards behind the reception desk for directions to the BW Fund, which we already knew was across the street. They pointed the way for him and described the short drive. "Thanks, guys. We've been on the road a while. Is there a bathroom I can use?" Dan asked in his Dan Rather voice, the perfect spokesman voice for interviews, making Act Up sound calm, determined, and reasonable. 5 minutes later, Dan was back in the car with a full description of his just completed test run of our infiltration plan. First, the bad news. There were 3 guards behind the reception desk, not the single guard that had been there during my visit in January. Then, some good news. The lobby's bathroom was just around the corner from the elevator, which was about 20 feet from the reception desk. At 10:15 a.m., all 5 of us entered the lobby, briefcases in hand. Dan led and played it casual and cool. "Hey guys, we're back," he told the guards with a chuckle. "The folks at the BW Fund couldn't find the person we have a meeting scheduled with in their directory and suggested we try here." "What's the employee's name?" one of the guards asked. "Peter McGrath," Dan replied, using a mashup of James's and my names. "Excuse me," I interrupted. "Can the rest of us use the bathroom while you try to find this guy?" "Sure," the guard said, pointing. "It's just around that corner." As Dan stayed behind, we walked toward the bathrooms. Luck was with us. A female employee was entering the elevator as we approached, and we slipped in behind her. "Hey, that's the wrong way," a guard yelled out. Our hearts were pounding. The female employee, hearing the guard, began to reach across me for the door open button. "It's okay," I told her as I put my hand gently on her arm while the elevator door started to close. We heard the guard's hard leather-soled shoes hitting the lobby's marble floor in a sprint. Thankfully, they were too late. In the confusion now below us, Dan quietly walked out of the lobby to the safety of our car. Our elevator guest with her slightly concerned expression, got off on the second floor. We exited on the third floor and made our way to a row of offices facing the nearby highway, where TV trucks could get a good look at us. Along the way, I snapped open my briefcase and pulled out the cell phone and walkie-talkie, handing the latter to Lee. I pointed to the first office with a good highway view, holding the cell phone to my ear. A woman was sitting at the only desk in the small 10-foot by 10-foot space, talking on her phone. "Excuse me, ma'am," Lee said with authority, pointing with his walkie-talkie with the demeanor of a security guard. "There's a situation on this floor. Please walk calmly to the lobby until further notice." "Joyce, I gotta go," she said into the phone, then quickly hung up and walked out. As soon as she rounded the corner, the four of us squeezed into her office and shut the door. I immediately called Jay and Steve at the hotel. "We're in," I said. "Do your magic." Using 2 phones, a fax machine, and a well-researched contact list of local and national media, they started alerting TV stations and newspapers, faxing out our pre-written press release. At 10 a.m. this morning, 4 AIDS activists seized an office at the headquarters of Burroughs Wellcome Company, demanding that Burroughs lower the retail price of its antiviral drug Retrobir, or AZT, by at least 25% from the current level of $8,000 a year. After explaining the issues involved, it went on to say, the activists, who include both people with AIDS and people with AIDS-related complex, ARC, say they plan to stay inside the premises until Burroughs agrees to their demands or until they are evicted. The sit-in is the first time that a group of people dependent on a drug have taken action against the manufacturer's headquarters site. They have set aside $5,000 to reimburse the company for any property damage incurred during the action. Before I had even ended the call to our media team, that property damage had begun. James wielded his battery-operated drill like a surgeon, while Blaine played nurse, quickly handing him a steady flow of steel mending plates and screws. In less than a minute, James had secured all 3 edges of the metal door to its frame using more than a dozen plates. Even a battering ram couldn't open it now. But we had a problem. The dinky office had a second door on the wall to the right of the exterior windows. Worse still, this one opened outward. Luckily, James had packed for multiple contingencies and grabbed a bunch of steel corner braces from his briefcase. "Feed me these," he told Blaine, as they moved their operation to the second door, which was soon sealed. The cell phone rang. It was a reporter with the Associated Press. Our media team was feeding us press interviews one at a time, each limited to 5 minutes, with James's busy drill providing a dramatic soundtrack for the curious reporters. We also had another problem. Both doors had rectangular plexiglass transom windows above them, which could be broken through pretty easily. We improvised. Blaine emptied a small metal bookcase behind the desk, and with Lee's help, ripped it apart. 2 of its disassembled panels fit perfectly over the windows, and James drilled them into place. We were entombed. An AP wire story about our invasion had already gone out, and a few national radio stations began running it. Someone started pounding on the office door, asking who we were and why we were there. "We're from ACT UP," I yelled back. "We're demanding that Burroughs Wellcome lower the price of AZT. We are non-violent and unarmed, but we won't be coming out until the company responds to our demands." Silence. We returned to work. While others continued doing cell phone interviews, I unpacked the suction cups and glass cutter, placing the cups on the huge slanted wall of glass facing the highway. The plan was to hang our banner outside the window for a dramatic photo of the action. I tried cutting out a large square piece but the cutter did nothing more than scratch the surface. The windows were almost an inch thick. I tried using James's drill, but none of the bits could penetrate the glass. By this time, I had worked up a sweat. "Let's try the chair," I said. "Stand in the far corner and face away from the glass." I closed my eyes and heaved the heavy leather chair against the glass. The smack was loud and scary, but did nothing to the glass. I tried again. Nothing. Even Studley James tried a couple of times, and still nothing. But by this point, the chair wasn't doing so well, with its casters flying off and the armrests bent in. I radioed Dan and Deborah on their walkie-talkie and told them we'd have to use Plan B for the arriving press. We wouldn't be hanging a banner, and the tinted glass prevented cameras from getting a good view of us inside. The TV crews and newspaper photographers were told to congregate near the front entrance of the building. Then came another knock on the door. "This is the Durham Police. You are trespassing on these premises. Open this door or we'll have to enter forcibly. You have 10 minutes to decide." "Drama queen," Blaine muttered. We waited in silence. 10 minutes later, the door rocked from a hard thud. They were trying to body slam it open. James' handiwork was holding strong. They slammed harder with no luck. We heard someone say, "Let me try." As the thuds continued, we all smiled and gave the thumbs up sign to James. Several minutes passed. We heard a muffled conversation down the hall, but we couldn't make it out. And then, boom! The room shook and dust fell from the ceiling. They were body slamming the damn wall instead of the door. Unlike older, hardened office walls, there was apparently nothing between us and the police except 2 layers of sheetrock and some steel studwork. With another blow, the room shook again as the entire wall warped inward. A couple ceiling tiles crashed to the floor, as did our hopes of holding our space much longer. The air in the office became cloudy with dust. "Handcuffs," I said. The others grabbed their handcuffs while I pulled out the long chain and padlock. I wrapped the chain around a radiator cover and locked it into a loop. Then we handcuffed ourselves to the chain. I radioed a last message to Dan and Deborah. "The jig is up. They're breaking through the wall. Tell the press we'll be outside soon." Amazingly, though, the wall stood. The cops decided to kick a hole through it, then widen it. After 3 or 4 kicks, we saw a boot burst through the wall about 2 feet above the floor. The boot kept kicking until the hole was about 2 feet wide. A cop on all fours peeked through, spotting us across the room. He crawled through, immediately followed by another cop and then another. The 3 of them rushed towards us, sweating and angry. "We won't resist," I said. "It's okay. We won't resist." As they assessed the situation, they soon calmed down. "What's this?" one of them asked, grabbing the chain. "A chain," I replied. The cops started ripping apart the radiator cover to release the chain. One of them used James's drill to remove all the mending plates from the door. "Guess we don't have to handcuff you," a cop laughed. "Let's just leave them out with the chain." Ooh, I thought to myself, that'll make for a great picture. They grabbed our briefcases and unused banner and led us back to the elevator, then down to the lobby. Dozens of employees had gathered there, standing back, silent, but with all eyes observing us as we passed. We had been inside for just 55 minutes. I was pissed off they got us out that quickly, but it didn't matter. We had given the press plenty of time to gather outside. They swarmed us as we approached the parking lot. One of the TV reporters yelled out a question, asking us why we had sealed ourselves inside the headquarters. "Borough's Welcome is profiting off our lives," I said. That's why we did today what we did. And if they don't see to start listening to my community, to our community, the AIDS community, then we're going to be back. A photographer with the Raleigh News and Observer, the leading local paper, snapped the perfect picture. Two sheriff's deputies from Durham leading us to their car. One is wearing a classic four-dent, flat-brimmed sheriff's hat with a large shield on the front. Blaine is in the foreground, mid-stride, taking a confident step forward. James and I have our suit coats off, slung casually over our shoulders, as if strolling on a lunch break on a warm summer day. The deputy in front is leading us all by a long looped chain. Perfectly framed, the headquarters of Borough's Welcome towers behind us. The picture filled almost a quarter of the Raleigh News and Observer's front page the next morning. Another newspaper dubbed us the Chain Gang. During the drive to Durham Police Station, the four of us were crammed in the back of a sheriff's cruiser. One of the deputies asked us to explain the issue we were protesting about. Have you heard of AZT? I asked. I think so, one of them replied. That's that AIDS drug, right? Yep, I said. We're trying to get them to lower the price. They originally priced it at $10,000 a year, the most expensive drug in history. $10,000? The deputy asked incredulously. That's crazy. That was our first sign we might get some very sympathetic press coverage that day. But not everyone would be so friendly. In Durham County, a magistrate sets release conditions and bail after your arrest. Our lawyer had warned us that the magistrate on duty that day had a reputation for being very tough. She would likely look unkindly on radical young activists from New York City flagrantly breaking laws in her tough on crime Southern County. It probably didn't help that all three local TV stations were parked outside, each running live reports on their noon broadcasts. We were the lead story on all three. After they booked and fingerprinted us, we sat in a holding cell for almost 2 hours while charges were being decided. The police continued their kindness, only charging us with 2 misdemeanors, first-degree trespass and willful damage to property. The maximum sentence we faced was 2.5 years in prison. With the TV crew still waiting outside, we were brought before the magistrate. She was behind a high counter in a small room with no chairs, not far from the holding cells. Gentlemen, she began, I'm sure you were looking forward to some television interviews before getting home to New York. But these are still serious charges. I'm setting your bail at $5,000 each. So 20,000 total? I asked. That's right, she smiled smugly. She replied. Do you take traveler's checks? I asked, breaking a smile, knowing full well they were accepted. I reached into my inside coat pocket and whipped out a thick stack of $100 American Express traveler's checks. Her eyes widened. Do you have a pen? I asked. I had brought exactly $20,000, having withdrawn the amount from my brokerage account before the trip. Our lawyer nailed it. He predicted we might need that much if the magistrate got tough with us. Outside, the press swarmed us again, and we answered all their questions. Jay and Steve also had 2 of us lined up for live studio interviews at the top of the 5:30 and 6 p.m. local news broadcasts. CNN had us on their hourly loop, running the footage of us being brought out of the building. Our stated commitment to pay for any property damage not only helped with getting sympathetic press coverage, but also kept us out of jail and out of court. Within 72 hours, Borough's Welcome struck a deal with our lawyer, dropping all charges if we reimbursed them for the damage. Rebuilding the wrecked office and replacing the heavily scratched window would cost $9,180. It would make our demo an expensive one, but ACT UP made good on our press release promise to pay. Durham County sent a check to return the $20,000 I spent on bail. The motel, rentals, and hardware had cost less than $1,000, bringing the total spent to just over $10,000. Not bad for an action that created a local and national news story focused on the high price of AZT. We had struck a blow, hurting the company's reputation in its own backyard. I'm going to stop there. It goes on, but I hope you'll read the chapter and hopefully the rest of the book when you all get a chance.
Thank you, Peter. And thanks for indulging my request for that chapter because it's one of my favorite chapters because you can feel the tension. I could feel your adrenaline going up. And I also love that there's a Southern piece to it, which my colleague Holly, who's also from the South, commented that she loves your Southern accent. So,
oh, good.
So thank you. So thank you for shouting out to the South.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and it was in one of the sentences in this chapter, in this section that you just read, you said finding activists who aren't scared off by the worst case scenarios is often the most challenging pre-action task. And, you know, this is my fantasy for the community. What you just described, like, I want to break into a building. I want the press to show up. Like, I want to come out in a chain and the press be there and people finally do what we need, you know, to have done so that we can get our lives back. And, you know, activism for some people is scary. It's out of their you know, their comfort zone. And as you know, with our community, some of us can literally physically not show up to something. But I wanted to ask you, you know, we do have folks who are maybe have milder ME, or there's family members or, you know, friends that we could enlist to help us do an action like this. And I'm wondering, what advice would you give folks who are physically able to do something like that, but are uncomfortable or scared with, you know, outside strategy that you just described?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of ways to handle this. First off, if you've never been arrested before, and you build into your action some law breaking, some civil disobedience, you'll generally only do a few hours in a holding cell before you're processed. You'll never be sentenced to any time, and the system generally gives you a pretty slap on the wrist. I've been arrested 10 times, and I have no record. So we had good pro bono lawyers. I have a clean legal record. You can't find my prior arrests in the system. So, and certainly if you're a first timer, that's going to be the case. But if you don't want to, you know, you can still do, there's a variety of outside actions. Like I just did one in front of Ron Klain's house in Washington, D.C. Ron Klain is Biden's chief of staff. And we designed the action so that it was legal, so that we weren't breaking any laws. And but it was still, we had a very strong visual. We had some set designers in New York create a 12-foot high mountain of bones that could quickly be assembled in front of, on his sidewalk in front of the house. And the sidewalk was public property. So we decided just to do like, have the press come and meet us in advance. And set up the mountain quickly. It was very scary because Secret Service was there and we had hoped they wouldn't be, but it turned out they were. So we had to set up the mountain of bones, 6 feet in front of a Secret Service van, which scared the shit out of us. But I would, I knew enough about Secret Service to say they're kind of trained for this, and they generally are trained to let it happen. They are the best people in the world at assessing actual risk versus civil disobedience. They will actually 90% odds just leave us alone, and that's what happened. They never got out of their car. We didn't get arrested. We got full articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post. So yeah, there are ways to do outside actions now where you're in and out pretty quickly. You use a really strong visual. You get whatever visual you need for the press, and then you end it quickly. As soon as the cops show up, and this is what happened at Clayne's house. The neighbors called the cops, or the Secret Service called the cops. The cops quietly walk up. They were very calm. And I walked up to the cops and I said, we only have 60 more seconds and we're out of here. We'll disassemble the mountain of bones and we're gone. And the cops said, great, thanks. And they stood back and watched us end our press conference. So there are ways to do this where you get cooperation, that if you're very obviously doing legal free speech.
It's interesting because folks, in my non-activist world will say, did you see that people got arrested? Oh my God, they're so stupid. And I always have to say, wait a minute, you don't understand this. That was planned. Yes. All of this is planned. So, one of the things that I hope that folks realize through listening to this story, did you hear all the planning? There was a lawyer that was contacted. You had 2 people doing press for you. Somebody had to rent the car rental. You had to get the $20,000 in cash. You had to really figure out the strategy. You had to scope out the space. You had to fix that bathroom is going to be key to us getting in. How many, it's very well orchestrated. And I don't think that probably the majority of the world gets that. Yeah. They think those radical activists, they got arrested today. No, they planned it.
Yes. Yeah, we're all willing to get arrested. It's part of the action.
Totally. And I've shared that, we started MA Action Activist Camp this year, and because a lot of us are so inspired by the HIV community, a number of the speakers that I invite are people living with HIV. So Wahida Jabaz-El is one of our very first trainers. And she talks about if you, don't plan to win, you plan to fail. And that you can't just throw it together, you can't just be impulsive. You really do need to think about it.
Right. I do notice a comment here from Cynthia Johnson that thank you for bringing up peaceful legal actions without lawyers. It's still a good tactic, though, to have a lawyer's number.
Yes.
Who is informed ahead of time, because you never know. Even if you structured everything legal, the cops could be overly aggressive and just arrest you for even though you're not breaking any laws. That on rare occasions that happens, and you'll need a lawyer. So have that number.
Yeah, a few years ago, MA Action folks, I won't name them, I may have been involved. We interrupted actually Fauci and Francis Collins giving testimony before Congress. And, that's one of the first things that I did was say, we need to have a lawyer's phone number. And so I called, I'm sure, Jaron at Housing Works, and we called them and said, who helped with the Supreme Court case arrest, that when the Supreme Court cases about gender identity and sexual orientation and discriminating against people in their workplace and firing them. So I called Jared and I said, who was that lawyer that helped us in DC? And he gave me their number, and we had a short phone call, and they were like, I really don't think anything's going to happen with Capitol Police, but you never know. They can be a little gregarious about stuff. So, to your point, it's always good to have the phone number just in case.
Yeah,
for sure. I want to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit because some of the other actions that you were part of and that ACT UP is famous for are, stormed the NIH. There was stuff at the FDA. Certainly, we know that there was stuff at the CDC in changing the AIDS definition to include women-specific illnesses. And I have shared with you, even very recently, that, the ME community has a very long, complicated relationship with federal agencies, and in particular with NIH. And, in my opinion, we have not had the success in getting them to take ME seriously, from putting funding into, basic science about our disease to finding out why this is happening to our bodies. A couple of years ago, they did throw some money into some ME research centers of excellence, but it was very little money.
right.
And I'm wondering, with your long-term experience, not only on outside strategies, but inside strategies, how can we crack NIH? I mean, they really are this like thorn in our side.
Right. I would recommend Congress, and I know that's an entirely different route, but you got to remember when we started our beef with the NIH with ACT UP in like 1989. They are at that point they were already spending. Congress had already appropriated. By 89, it was getting close to $500 million a year on AIDS, and so it was not something that NIH did. They would never have been able to shift $500 million out of other research areas to research HIV/AIDS if it weren't for that specific congressional appropriation. And I think that's what the Alzheimer's community has been very successful at, because they were at very low levels about a decade ago, and have substantially increased it. If you want to carve out kind of semi-significant funds at the NIH, the problem with just going through the NIH is that the civil servants have to rob Paul to pay Peter. They have to move it from something else because they only get a set amount for each of their agencies, and those agents and other diseases have built up years of this is what we get every year. It grows by a little bit every year, inflation or whatever, but this is what we get every year. How dare you take it away from us? So I think the way to break through that is to get it slipped in by some friend, and this is not something where you have to get 50 senators on board for, or half of Congress on board for. You need a couple friends to slip it in the appropriations bill, and have it be reasonable enough so that it doesn't create opposition anywhere. And that's how you get it. That's how AIDS started back in the 80s. It was gay staffers to Senator Kennedy and Dingell in the House, and they both had gay aides who they worked with their senator and their congressman and they slipped it into the annual NIH appropriations bill, and started getting that AIDS money going, and the Republicans didn't complain. So that's how we got AIDS started, and I would recommend that for you're just gonna the structure you're trying to do now of getting the civil servants to shift money away from something else is going to be very hard for them to do politically.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely, we've had meetings with Francis Collins, we've had meetings with other folks at the NIH, and, even your buddy Fauci said, go after Collins' special fund that he has. So we tried that. You have a special fund. We know you have a special fund. Why can't you put money into this? And anyway, as you know, he's leaving.
Yep.
Do you have any insights on who might be replacing him?
I have not heard anything yet.
Okay, but you'll let me know, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm gonna. So we've got a couple of questions, and we, of course, as a community, are very interested in anything to do with press. We have been working hard. Adrian Tillman at ME Action and our volunteers have been working very hard to get information to the press about ME because of the connection to long COVID. But we still, have challenges. So we have a question, how do people with ME succeed in getting press to show up? Do you have any advice? Because in the San Francisco Bay Area, they've ignored every Millions Missing event. And of course, Millions Missing is our big event that we have every May. So any advice around that?
Well, first off, it's really hard. And sometimes you're in a situation where there's pretty much nothing you can do to get press interested because you're just not a story du jour, as it were. The reason we got press on the action in front of Clayton's house, well, first off, it was the first time a progressive movement had demonstrated in front of Clayton's house, in front of Biden's chief of staff, and that was news in and of itself, and it outraged a lot of people, obviously, and we took that hit. But more importantly, the issue we were doing, which was international COVID vaccines, is a hot topic for the press right now. The press is with us on this. They are being very critical of the Biden administration on how they're vaccinating the rest of the world. So this fit into something writers at the Times and Washington Post were already writing about. So it was easy. Most movements don't have, that sweet spot happening. So you either have to figure out how to move the ball without any press coverage, which is possible. Again, I think getting an appropriation snuck in Congress and getting some real funding for ME is something you could do without any press at all. In fact, press might not be the right thing to do for that strategy. So you don't always have to do the press. But in the absence of not being a story du jour, which is really the only way that press comes, getting press becomes, somewhat possible, is to get some press interest with some inside work, to start building, to start a campaign with a very specific target, and start working the issue from the inside and creating some sort of track record of discussions. A major report comes out or something. Start trying to build relationships with the media on your campaign, briefing them. They're going to wait for a hook the hook can be something with your inside work. Um, whether it be, you finally got a meeting with people in the administration, or you got a meeting with AOC's office, or I don't know what it's going to be. Some sort of inside work, little victory where it looks like you're making progress. That's when the press is like, oh, well, maybe this is going to be something that if I start reporting on now, it'll, I'll be the reporter that saw the bigger caught it early before the bigger victory later. So that kind of can entice a couple of reporters, but it's a very challenging game to get that to happen. But prep for instance, the prep work we were doing before COVID, we did some really hard-hitting inside work with Congress. We did our own investigations and uncovered this huge finding that the government had the patents on developing PrEP, and nobody knew this. So we took that to the Washington Post as an exclusive. At the same time that we brought it to members of Congress, and we're going to have it hit the Washington Post and have all those congressmen and senators primed to speak out about it, and be shocked that the US government had these patents. And that put us, so there was a moment, the press didn't give a damn about HIV. They had stopped covering AIDS for years and years and years. You had to be really big news to get an AIDS story in those newspapers. But through our inside work, we had stumbled on a major moment that was newsworthy, and we just really we were very savvy about it. We gave it to the Washington Post as an exclusive, and we did a lot of work with Congress to make it a moment. And that turned into hearings, and that snowballed. And shockingly, the US government decided to sue Gilead, and that became United States versus Gilead. One of the very first times in history that any department within the HHS has sued a pharmaceutical company. So it became a huge victory for us. And that case is in the works, and we're hoping for something to come of that in the next year or two.
Well, in our community, we've talked a lot about, is there an opportunity to sue the government? I think about Terry McGovern and the class action lawsuit around the case definition of AIDS. I just feel like we've been so historically harmed and ignored that there's got to be a class action lawsuit in there somewhere. I know we have about 6 minutes left, and there's people putting questions in the chat. They're very similar to my questions on my list. So I'm going to try to do a quick round robin with you on these questions because I know people want to know. So I have a question about shaming, and so does Rivka. So in your book, you actually talk about the role of shaming different federal agencies. And what do you think the role of shaming is in activism, and do you think it's effective?
Oh yeah, shaming is a big thing. Definitely can be effective, especially with, it's interesting, especially when your targets are not like, we couldn't shame Jesse Helms. If your target is truly evil, shame doesn't work. But if your target is somebody who's in a position to help you and is a bureaucrat and is overwhelmed with other work and is getting hit from all sides, shame can, you become what's the saying? The greasy wheel gets the I forget what.
I know.
The noisy chain gets the greaser. I forget what the thing is, but yeah, if you're the noisiest one And shame is a way to do this, especially with people that have some goodness in them. And I think most people in government, almost most, except the politicians, but most civil servants came there for good reasons. And they're overwhelmed. They never do enough. They're always disappointing us. But there's a good heart there somewhere, and you need to work. Guilt tripping them is a very appropriate tactic, and it often works. It often makes them work a little harder, and yeah, it's perfectly fine to do.
So, long COVID, which I've talked with you about, many times, is, something that our community, the ME community, saw coming from millions miles away. Many of us had a viral trigger to the onset of our disease. So we were like, we knew this was coming.
Right.
And it's interesting because, despite our efforts, I still don't feel like we have a collective of activists working on long COVID and ME in the way that I would like. And what I mean by that is, this idea of collective liberation, that nobody is free unless we're all free.
Right.
Even if I don't have HIV, but have dedicated my life to working on it since 1989. And so, even if this is not an issue that is kind of in your purview or your wheelhouse or your interest, it makes me concerned that we're not all trying to help each other. And I'm just wondering, do you have any suggestions on community organizing and, inviting people to focus, energy and effort into fighting against ME and long COVID, particularly now in this window of opportunity that we have during COVID?
Just that I think you're on the right path here. I mean, I'm kind of surprised because I've read a lot of articles that tie the two pretty closely and tie the activists pretty closely. This is news to me that there isn't a greater degree of current coordination.
Well, I don't mean between us. I don't mean between people with long COVID and ME. I mean people outside of that. Like, we need more HIV activists to join us. We need people in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, because if one of us in the disability justice community isn't free, none of us are.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that helps, but mostly because you don't want to. I mean, AIDS activists have had moments where we've gotten pushback from other disease groups who were thought we were getting more than our fair share, and feeling as though there was a limited pie, and so you're starting to fight over the pieces. And AIDS activists have always tried to get all the disease groups to do long campaigns, many of which have been successful, on growing the NIH budget overall, so growing the pie. And those campaigns, there's a hugely successful one at the end of Clinton's second term, leading into Bush Jr.'s first term, where they doubled the NIH budget over 5 years. Extraordinary achievement. And then I think in the Obama years, there was huge. In the latter years, there was huge growth under various stimulus things for the NIH as well. So growing, trying to work with them to grow those pies, and just making sure you're not fighting against each other's interest. But I would think, as a coalition, you and the long COVID community have, plenty of people power and plenty of brain power, and certainly the press's attention right now to really ride a great wave together of getting things done.
Yeah, I mean, I can't thank, Adrian and all of our communication volunteers, Tinsley and Georgia, just been working so hard, because we do know that this is our moment.
Right.
we can't not get the attention of the world, we don't know when this is going to happen again. And it's unfortunate that it had to happen this way, that we had this opportunity, you know. So I'm just going to close with one final question that I think is a really great question that probably people think about a lot in their activism. And that's, how do you decide when to do inside versus outside work? You know, working inside can be frustrating to people that are, you know, in the midst of having extreme suffering from their disease, and or draw critiques from the community for complacency. And so, like, how do you decide when this is an inside strategy or an outside strategy? And you and I both know that inside and outside has to oftentimes go together.
Yeah.
You know, but sometimes it doesn't. And so how do you make that decision?
It's all based on the moment and what's going on, that moment in time, where the media is at, whether you're having any progress. I mean, you always start with whatever's easy. Path of least resistance, the easiest path is what you start with. And if you're going along that and having progress, just stick with it and try to get some momentum behind it. But sometimes you hit a wall, and after a few months, you're really, really frustrated. So you start looking at other tactics, other avenues of inside work. You know, you might be on just an executive branch strategy and not doing anything on the congressional side. So you do a double inside path or triple inside. You use a judicial path as well. It really is based on the moment and where you're at. If I've never said, go to the streets, that's the first thing you do. Because that's often the hardest thing to do. And if you know how to play a very savvy inside game and you can make progress doing that's often the path of least resistance, and that's where you can get a lot of work done.
Yeah. You literally are saying exactly the words that, you know, Annette Galdino at the Treatment Action Group, she has always said to me, look, this is the deal. It is so much easier to sit down and, you know, virtually and have a meeting and get what you want. Right. It's Absolutely. Their fault if we have to do outside.
Yeah.
It's been forced.
You know, and we got some pushback at TAG when we split off from ACT UP and we started focusing almost exclusively on inside work. But my only response to that is, this isn't about us. This isn't about whether the activists look radical, you know, so we can look good on Instagram. This is about getting the job done. Right. This is about making progress for the patient community. And if that means focusing exclusively on inside work, then that's what you do. If your outside work is just, you know, jerking off for your friends on Instagram, and it doesn't change, it doesn't get any national press attention, and doesn't change any policy, then that's Instagram, you know, that's online activism only. It's performance activism. It's not real activism.
Right.
And there's a lot of performance activism out there right now.
Yes, there is.
And not my thing.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that, because, you know, I think there's some folks that may think outside activism is an absolute no-no. Like, you should never do that, and you're going to make people mad and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, you don't understand activism. Like, if you think there's only one true way to get what we need, then I think you need to maybe do a little reading on social movements and activism and have chats like this. Right. And I agree, we have to do what we have to do to get our lives saved. And until we have an FDA approved drug, and until there's an ME clinic on every block, right, my buddies with HIV have, then, we have a lot of work to do.
Yep.
I thank you so much for having this chat with me, Peter. I adore you.
Thank you, Terry. And thanks to everybody who joined. Really rooting for ME Action. I watch everything you guys do. So
thank
congrats.
you. And please buy Peter's book if you want to read even more amazing stories of activism. It's a great book to stimulate your ideas and things that you've dreamt about that you want to do in your activism, and gives great kind of instructions in a way to do that. So please, I encourage you to buy Peter's book. It's, you can find it where all books are sold, I guess is the way to phrase it. And there it is. There's the beautiful color.
That's a postcard.
A postcard. Yeah.
Look, that's the cover.
Exactly. And Anderson Cooper did the intro. So
The forward.
if you're a fan of Anderson, then you'll get to read that too.
Who isn't?
Who isn't a fan of Anderson? Exactly. Anyway, so I'll let Julia close us out.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter. And thank you so much, Terry. My video's gone. I'm not sure where it is. I'm not sure you can see me.
I can see it.
All right, great. I want to thank you all for coming and engaging tonight and for this lively conversation. We really appreciate your insight, Peter. This is so instructive for me. I'm a fairly new ED, so this is really instructive for me in my work with ME Action, and I know it will help fuel our work going forward as we're right in the middle of a strategic plan. So thank you again. And thanks to everyone for coming. We really appreciate your questions and hope you'll come to future events like this. Engage with us on social media, and I put a little link in the chat if you'd like to make a donation to our year-end giving campaign. We are getting closer to our goal, and I think when we reach 75,000, I'm going to be doing a TikTok dance with my daughter. So anyway, I'll thank you again, everyone. We'll say good night. And Peter, Terry, thanks so much for being here with us.
If folks are interested in activism, please join us at ME Action. We have some really exciting things happening in 2022. And, my fantasy is to get arrested, but.
Well, and Terry, I think our Millions Missing, it's going to be in person. We see opportunities right there.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.